Imagine walking into a store, expecting kindness, but instead, you're met with cruel laughter and mockery, directed at someone who deserves compassion the most. Now, imagine the person silently watching this unfold is the company's CEO, Undercover. What he does next will leave you speechless. From shocking betrayal to an act of extraordinary justice, this story will expose the truth about how power and humanity collide in the most unexpected ways. You won't believe how it ends. Stay tuned. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. Daniel Kane adjusted his tie as he stood in front of the mirror, his reflection more unfamiliar than he expected. The tailored suits and polished shoes that once defined his image had been replaced with a faded blue shirt, khaki pants, and scuffed sneakers. His neatly combed hair was tousled deliberately to make him look like an everyman. For the first time in years, he felt nervous. It wasn't the high-stakes board meetings or multi-million-dollar deals that unsettled him. It was the thought of being just another face in the crowd. He glanced toward the kitchen, where his son Ethan was finishing his cereal. The wheelchair Ethan used was part of their everyday life, but it never seemed to limit him the way it limited how others saw him. Ethan had always been resilient, cracking jokes about his situation even when the world seemed crueler than it should have been. But the stories Ethan shared, the dismissive stares, the whispered comments, the moments of being ignored, lingered with Daniel like a splinter he couldn't dislodge. "Big day, huh?" Ethan asked, his smile contagious despite the hint of sarcasm in his voice. "Yeah," Daniel replied, grabbing a mug of coffee. He paused for a moment, studying Ethan. "You think I can pull this off?" Ethan shrugged. "Sure, just don't try too hard to be cool. Nobody likes the fun new guy. Blend in, observe." Daniel chuckled, appreciating Ethan's straightforward advice. "Noted." As he grabbed his keys and headed toward the door, Ethan called out, "Hey, Dad, don't just watch. If you see something wrong, do something about it." The words stayed with him during the drive to one of the company's busiest retail locations, a store in a bustling suburban plaza. The gleaming logo above the entrance was a testament to the success of his vision, a brand built on customer-first values and inclusivity. But the latest reports he'd received painted a different picture: stories of dismissive service, complaints of rudeness, and, most disturbingly, incidents of insensitivity toward vulnerable customers. He couldn't shake the thought that the values he held dear might not have trickled down to the front lines. That thought was why he was here, dressed as Mark, the newest trainee. Inside, the store buzzed with activity. Customers browsed aisles of neatly arranged products, while employees in red vests darted about, assisting when needed, or pretending to. Daniel was greeted by Lisa, the shift supervisor, whose clipped tone made her impatience with new hires obvious. She had sharp features and a sharper tongue, a fact that became clear when she introduced him to the team with a sarcastic flourish. "Everyone, this is Mark," Lisa said, gesturing toward him with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Try not to scare him off too fast." A few chuckles rippled through the group, but one younger employee, Josh, gave Daniel a quick nod and a tight smile. He seemed uncomfortable with Lisa's antics but didn't speak up. Daniel noted it silently, filing it away as his eyes scanned the store. From the polished floors to the colorful shelves, everything appeared as perfect as the company brochures promised. Yet, there was a tension in the air, a subtle undercurrent of indifference that didn't match the cheerful, customer-first mantra printed on the employees' badges. Daniel followed Lisa through a brief orientation, nodding as she rattled off procedures. Her tone shifted between professional and condescending, depending on whether she was speaking to him or another employee. By the time she left him to shadow Josh, Daniel had already identified her as a key player in the store's culture, a fact that both intrigued and concerned him. Josh was quieter, more cautious. As he showed Daniel the ropes, his movements were quick but hesitant, as if he were constantly checking over his shoulder. Daniel picked up on Josh's discomfort almost immediately, noticing how his eyes darted toward Lisa whenever she passed. "She's intense," Daniel ventured, trying to draw Josh out. Josh gave a small laugh, but it lacked humor. That's one word for it. You'll get used to it. Hopefully. As the day went on, Daniel observed everything, from the way employees interacted with customers to the way they spoke when they thought no one was listening. He noticed Megan, a young woman with a kind demeanor, assisting an elderly customer with genuine patience. In contrast, he overheard Lisa making a snide comment about another shopper who had trouble navigating the aisles. The contrast was stark, and Daniel's stomach tightened with unease. He was beginning to see the cracks beneath the polished surface. By the time his shift ended, Daniel was exhausted, not from the work itself, but from the weight of what he was starting to uncover. He drove home in silence, his thoughts replaying the day's interactions. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. Don't just watch. If you see something wrong, do something about it. He knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the store earlier than scheduled. The cool morning air carried the hum of delivery trucks unloading inventory, and the rhythmic squeak of carts being pushed inside added to the store's usual bustle. It gave him time to observe the team dynamic before his shift officially started. Lisa was already there, barking orders at a stockroom employee whose nervous fumbling slowed her efficiency. She sighed loudly, her frustration unmistakable. It's not rocket science, Greg. Just stack the boxes so they don't fall, okay? Greg, a wiry man with thinning hair, nodded quickly and resumed his work, his face flushed with embarrassment. Daniel watched from the sidelines, noting the sharp contrast between Lisa's demeanor and the corporate values printed on a motivational poster above the stockroom door. Respect, inclusion, integrity. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the store opened, the team gathered near the entrance for a quick briefing. Lisa ran through the day's goals with her usual brusqueness, emphasizing sales targets and reminding everyone to stay sharp. Megan, standing near the back, raised her hand hesitantly. Lisa, about the accessibility issue by aisle 7, she began, her voice trailing off as Lisa fixed her with a withering look. What about it? Lisa snapped, crossing her arms. Well, Megan continued, the aisles are a bit narrow for some customers. A man with a walker struggled yesterday and I thought maybe he should shop somewhere else? Lisa interrupted, smirking. A few employees chuckled nervously, but Megan's cheeks flushed with frustration. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain silent. He couldn't reveal his true identity yet, but the tension was growing harder to ignore. Lisa's dominance over the team stifled any attempt at improvement, and the others either followed her lead or avoided her altogether. It was becoming clear that her attitude was a symptom of deeper cultural issues within the store. Midway through the day, Daniel found himself restocking shelves with Josh. The younger man seemed more relaxed away from Lisa's watchful eye, though he still moved with an air of caution. Does she ever let up? Daniel asked, keeping his tone light but curious. Josh sighed, pausing to adjust a display. Not really. She's been here a long time and people just deal with it. Management doesn't seem to care as long as the numbers look good. Daniel nodded, his suspicions confirmed. He decided to probe further. And Megan? She seems nice. She is, Josh said, glancing around before lowering his voice. But nice doesn't get you far here. Lisa walks all over her, and Megan just takes it. She's too good for this place. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter near the customer service desk. Daniel turned to see Lisa and another employee, Sam, laughing while gesturing toward an older man struggling to lift a large item into his cart. The man moved slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Lisa's exaggerated mimicry of his movements drew more laughter, and the sight made Daniel's stomach turn. He felt a surge of anger, but reminded himself to stay in control. Instead of confronting her outright, he stepped closer to Josh. Does that happen often? He asked quietly. Josh hesitated, then nodded. Too often. But what can we do? She's the boss here. For the rest of the shift, Daniel observed carefully, his growing unease tempered by determination. That evening, as he reviewed the day's events in his notebook, a plan began to form. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was here to act. The store's rush hour began just after noon, bringing a flood of customers through the sliding glass doors. Daniel worked alongside Josh at the checkout station, scanning items and making small talk with shoppers. It gave him a closer view of how the employees managed under pressure, as well as the dynamics playing out between them. Lisa roamed the store with an air of authority, occasionally snapping at employees who she felt weren't moving fast enough. Megan, as usual, bore the brunt of her criticism. At one point, Lisa cornered Megan near the customer service desk, her voice cutting through the hum of activity. "Megan, you've spent 10 minutes with that lady. We're not running a therapy session," Lisa said, gesturing toward an elderly woman Megan had been assisting. "Move her along. We've got real customers to help." The woman, leaning heavily on her walker, heard Lisa's comment and froze. Megan, her face flushed with embarrassment, tried to explain. She just needed help finding— "Enough excuses," Lisa snapped. "Do your job, or someone else will." Daniel, who had been restocking a nearby display, felt a wave of anger rise within him. The older woman glanced at Megan with a look of sympathy before shuffling away, leaving her basket behind. Megan stood rooted in place, her hands trembling slightly as she fought back tears. Lisa stormed off without a second glance. Daniel approached Megan cautiously, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Hey, are you okay?" She nodded quickly, though her reddened eyes betrayed her. "I'm fine. I hate how she talks to people, to everyone." Daniel placed a hand on the edge of the shelf, leaning closer. "Why don't you say something, or report her?" Megan hesitated, glancing around to ensure Lisa was out of earshot. "I've tried, once, a few months ago. Management said they'd look into it, but nothing changed. If anything, Lisa got worse. She's untouchable." Daniel frowned, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. The toxic culture wasn't just Lisa's doing. It was enabled by a leadership structure that valued results over respect. It was bigger than one person. The afternoon took a darker turn when Mr. Carter, the disabled customer who had been mocked the day before, returned to the store. He moved slowly through the aisles, his posture slightly hunched as he navigated his cart with difficulty. Daniel noticed him immediately and watched as he struggled to reach a box on a high shelf. He started to approach, but before he could, Lisa appeared. Well, back again," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She stood a few feet away, watching as Mr. Carter reached awkwardly for the box. "Need a step stool this time?" A few employees nearby chuckled softly. Mr. Carter paused, his hand dropping to the cart as his face flushed. He didn't respond, his silence more damning than words. Megan, who had been tidying a nearby shelf, stepped forward. "Here, let me help you," she said quickly, grabbing the box and placing it in Mr. Carter's cart. Her voice was kind, but there was a tremor in it, as though she feared Lisa's reaction. Lisa rolled her eyes. "Always playing the hero, aren't you, Megan?" Daniel couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped closer, keeping his tone even but firm. "Why don't you try helping, instead of standing there and criticizing?" The nearby employees froze, their eyes darting between Lisa and Daniel. Lisa turned to him, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "Excuse me, you're a trainee. Maybe stay in your lane." Daniel didn't back down. "Respect isn't part of my training. It's part of being a decent human being." The tension in the air was palpable. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Mr. Carter spoke softly. "Thank you," he said, his voice directed at Megan, not Lisa. He turned his cart and shuffled away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Lisa glared at Daniel, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're out of line," she hissed before storming off. The rest of the shift passed in a strained quiet, but Daniel felt a small spark of hope. Megan had stood up, even if timidly, and he had drawn a line in the sand. It wasn't enough yet. but it was a start. That night, as he reflected on the day, Daniel knew the time for observation was ending. It was time to shake the foundation. The next day brought a shift in the store's atmosphere. Employees moved more cautiously, their usual chatter subdued. Daniel's confrontation with Lisa had clearly rippled through the team, creating an undercurrent of tension. Lisa, however, seemed unfazed, strutting through the store with her usual air of authority. Her smiles, sharp and fleeting, felt like veiled warnings to anyone who dared cross her. Daniel worked in the stockroom that morning, organizing inventory alongside Greg. Greg's hands moved methodically, though his posture betrayed his nerves. Daniel decided to break the silence. "How long have you been here, Greg?" he asked casually, stacking boxes of canned goods. Greg shrugged, not meeting Daniel's eyes. "Couple years. Long enough to know when to keep my head down." Daniel leaned against the shelving, curious. "What do you mean?" Greg hesitated, glancing toward the door before lowering his voice. "Lisa runs this place her way. If you don't stay on her good side, you'll regret it. She makes sure management knows who's underperforming. People who cross her don't last long." It was another piece of the puzzle. Lisa's influence extended far beyond her team. Her ability to manipulate management ensured her behavior went unchecked, fostering a culture of fear and silence. Daniel's resolve to address the deeper issues solidified further. Later that day, Megan approached him while he was straightening a shelf. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her vest. "Hey, Mark," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thanks for yesterday." Daniel straightened, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. You were the one who helped Mr. Carter." Megan shook her head. "Yeah, but you stood up to Lisa. No one ever does that. She's intimidating." "She's a bully," Daniel corrected gently. "And bullies only keep their power if no one challenges them." Megan bit her lip, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I've thought about leaving so many times, but I can't afford to. I need this job." Daniel's heart sank at her admission. The store wasn't just a workplace for Megan, it was a lifeline. The stakes for her, and likely many others, were higher than he had realized. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the checkout lanes. Daniel turned to see Lisa and Josh locked in a heated exchange. Lisa's voice carried over the murmur of customers, sharp and cutting. "You call this organized?" she barked, holding up a crumpled receipt. "It's a mess, just like your work." Josh, red-faced, stammered, I was just trying to what? Embarrass us? Get it together or I'll find someone who can." Lisa snapped, tossing the receipt onto the counter before storming off. Josh stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, you okay?" Josh exhaled shakily, nodding. "She does this all the time. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," Daniel said firmly. He glanced around, noting the customers watching the scene with discomfort. The store's reputation was at risk, not just because of Lisa's behavior, but because of the culture she had cultivated. By the end of the day, Daniel had made up his mind. Observation wasn't enough anymore. It was time to take decisive action. As he drove home, the details of his plan began to fall into place. He wouldn't just confront Lisa. He would confront the entire system that allowed her to thrive. At dinner, Ethan noticed the determined look on his father's face. "Big plans tomorrow?" he asked, smirking. Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Yeah, it's time to make some changes." Ethan's smile faded slightly, replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Be careful, Dad. People like her don't go down easy." Daniel reached across the table, ruffling Ethan's hair. "I've dealt with tougher, but thanks for the warning." That night, Daniel stayed up late, drafting a blueprint for the changes he intended to make. It wasn't just about Lisa anymore. It was about reshaping the culture of the company he had built from the ground up. If he didn't act now, everything he stood for would crumble under the weight of complacency. The store was quieter than usual the next morning, the lull before the midday rush giving Daniel a chance to put his plan in motion. He began the day with small but deliberate actions, planting seeds of change that would grow into something undeniable. He started by talking to the employees one-on-one, gathering their stories, their frustrations, and their ideas for improvement. Megan was the first to open up fully. Over a quick coffee break in the stockroom, she shared her struggles in hushed tones. "When I started here, I loved this job. I believed in what the company stood for. But Lisa, she makes it so hard. She doesn't care about people, just numbers." Daniel nodded, taking mental notes. "What would you change if you could?" Megan blinked, surprised by the question. I don't know. I guess I'd start with more training, real training, not just how to sell more, but how to actually help people." It was a simple answer, but it carried weight. Training wasn't just about skills. It was about shaping the store's culture. Daniel thanked her, promising to take her ideas seriously. Next, he approached Josh during a lull at the checkout. Josh seemed wary at first, glancing around as if expecting Lisa to appear at any moment. When Daniel asked about his experience working under Lisa, Josh hesitated. "She's tough," he said carefully. "But I guess she has to be, right? To keep the store running?" "Does she?" Daniel countered, his tone measured. "Does yelling and mocking people really make things run better?" Josh looked down, his hands fidgeting with a stray receipt. "No," he admitted softly. "It just makes everyone afraid. But what can we do? Management doesn't care, and Lisa, she's untouchable." Daniel leaned closer, his voice quiet but firm. "What if she wasn't?" Josh looked up sharply, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You'd need proof," he said. "Something they can't ignore." Daniel nodded. "I'm working on it." His conversations continued throughout the morning, each one adding a layer to his understanding of the store's dynamics. By the time the lunch rush hit, he felt more determined than ever. But he also knew that gathering stories wasn't enough. He needed a moment, a turning point, that would force everyone to confront the truth. That moment came shortly after noon. Mr. Carter returned to the store, his familiar slow gait drawing Daniel's attention. The older man was clearly struggling, his cart half filled with groceries as he paused to rest against a shelf. Daniel started to approach, but before he could, Lisa appeared. "Back again?" Lisa's voice rang out louder than necessary. She smirked, her tone dripping with faux cheerfulness. "You must really love it here." Mr. Carter looked up, his expression wary but calm. "Just trying to get a few things." Lisa leaned against the shelf, blocking his path. "Need help again? Or maybe you'd like us to shop for you. Wouldn't want you to strain yourself." The words hung in the air like a slap. A few customers nearby stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting between Lisa and Mr. Carter. Megan, standing a few aisles away, froze mid-step, her face a mixture of shock and anger. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "That's enough, Lisa." Lisa turned, her smirk faltering when she saw him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daniel said, his tone calm but firm. "That's enough. This isn't how we treat people. Not here, not anywhere." Lisa's eyes narrowed and her voice turned cold. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job. You're just a trainee." Daniel took a step closer, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You're right. I'm just a trainee. But I know disrespect when I see it, and so does everyone else here." For a moment the store was silent. Customers and employees alike watched the confrontation, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Mr. Carter shifted uneasily, his hand gripping the edge of his cart. "Lisa," Daniel continued, his voice steady, "if you can't treat people with basic decency, maybe you're in the wrong job." Lisa's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for a response. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. The tension in the store seemed to dissipate slightly as she disappeared into the back office. Daniel turned to Mr. Carter, his expression softening. "Are you okay, sir?" Mr. Carter nodded slowly, though his hands still trembled. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I appreciate it." Megan approached cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was Brave. It was necessary, Daniel replied, but it's just the beginning. As the store returned to its usual rhythm, Daniel felt a shift in the air. The employees had seen what standing up to Lisa looked like. For the first time, they glimpsed the possibility of change. Daniel knew he had taken a risk, but he also knew it was a risk worth taking. The next step would be critical. It was time to reveal the truth. By the time Daniel walked into the store the following morning, the tension was palpable. Lisa's usual domineering presence had been replaced by a quiet, simmering hostility. She avoided Daniel altogether, but the sharp looks she cast at Megan and Josh spoke volumes. The other employees kept their heads down, though there was an undeniable buzz of curiosity in the air. Word of Daniel's confrontation with Lisa had spread, and while some seemed wary of the fallout, others appeared cautiously hopeful. Daniel wasted no time. He knew the moment was ripe for action, but he needed to ensure his plan would stick. He began by pulling Megan and Josh aside during a break, leading them to a quiet corner of the stockroom. "I need your help," he began, his voice low and steady. "What happened yesterday was important, but it's not enough. We need to change things here. For good." Megan looked hesitant but intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's time to make sure management understands what's really happening in this store," Daniel explained. "They need to see the culture Lisa's created and how it's affecting everyone, but we need to be strategic. Stories aren't enough, we need proof." Josh frowned, glancing toward the door as if expecting Lisa to burst in at any moment. "Proof? Like what?" "Like documentation," Daniel said. "Patterns of behavior, specific incidents. Anything that shows this isn't just a one-time issue. I've been taking notes, but I need your help to fill in the gaps. What's been happening here didn't start yesterday, and it won't end unless we address it head-on." Megan nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing with determination. "I've kept a journal," she admitted. "Every time Lisa's said or done something that crossed the line, I've written it down. I just didn't know what to do with it." "That's perfect," Daniel said, his tone encouraging. "And Josh, you've been here long enough to know what the real issues are. If you're willing to help, we can make a strong case." Josh hesitated, shifting his weight nervously. "I don't know, Mark. What if she finds out? What if it backfires?" Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice firm but reassuring. "If we stay silent, nothing changes. But if we do this right, we won't just be helping ourselves, we'll be helping every employee who walks through those doors in the future." Josh looked at Megan, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'm in." Over the next few hours, the three of them worked discreetly, gathering as much information as possible. Megan shared pages from her journal, recounting incidents that ranged from condescending remarks to outright public humiliation. Josh provided details about how Lisa manipulated schedules and evaluations to punish employees she didn't like. Daniel added his observations, compiling everything into a clear, detailed account of the store's toxic culture. As the afternoon rush began, Daniel noticed a shift in the team's dynamics. Megan and Josh, emboldened by their shared mission, began stepping up in small but significant ways. Megan offered to help a flustered new hire who was struggling to organize a display, while Josh took the initiative to assist a customer who had been waiting too long at the service desk. Their actions didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the team, who started to follow their lead, creating pockets of positivity amidst the lingering tension. Lisa, however, was far from oblivious. She spent much of the day prowling the aisles, her sharp eyes darting from one employee to the next. Daniel could feel her gaze on him whenever he passed, a burning mix of suspicion and resentment. She was watching, waiting for him to slip up. But Daniel had no intention of giving her the satisfaction. As the shift wound down, Daniel called Megan and Josh over one last time. "Tomorrow we take this to management," he said. "I'll handle the meeting, but I need you both to be ready to speak if they ask for details. Are you okay with that?" Megan nodded without hesitation. "Yes." Josh hesitated, but eventually nodded as well. "Yeah, let's do it." That night, as Daniel prepared his final notes, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Megan and Josh had stepped up in ways that showed their true character, proving that even in the face of adversity, change was possible. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin. It wasn't just about confronting Lisa. It was about holding the entire system accountable, and Daniel was ready. The following morning, Daniel arrived at the store with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just walking into a confrontation, he was walking into a turning point. The sunlight glinted off the store's logo as he approached, the familiar sight now imbued with a deeper meaning. This place wasn't just a business. It was a reflection of his values, and he was determined to restore what had been tarnished. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Word had spread that Lisa had been unusually quiet that morning, her usual cutting remarks replaced by curt instructions and sharp glances. The employees seemed to sense that something was brewing, though none of them dared to ask what. Daniel made his way to the manager's office, where he knew the district manager, Mr. Holloway, would be conducting his routine monthly visit. As he entered the office, Holloway looked up from his laptop, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "Mark, isn't it?" Holloway said, his voice polite but distant. "What brings you here?" Daniel shut the door behind him, taking a steady breath. "Actually, I think it's time we spoke about some serious issues happening in this store." Holloway raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Serious issues? That's quite the statement. Care to elaborate?" Daniel placed the folder he'd compiled on the desk, his movements deliberate. "Inside this, you'll find detailed accounts of employee mistreatment, customer disrespect, and a toxic workplace culture. It's not just one or two incidents, it's a pattern. And the person at the center of it is Lisa." Holloway's expression shifted slightly, a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Lisa? She's one of our longest-standing supervisors. Her store consistently meets its targets." "At what cost?" Daniel countered, his voice calm but firm. "I've spent the past week observing this store undercover. I've seen Lisa mock customers, humiliate employees, and create an environment where people are too afraid to speak up. The only reason the store meets its targets is because people are bullied into compliance." Holloway leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Undercover? What are you talking about?" Daniel straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "My name isn't Mark. It's Daniel Kane. I'm the CEO of this company." The room fell silent, the weight of Daniel's words settling heavily in the air. Holloway's eyes widened as recognition dawned, his posture stiffening. "You're the—" "Yes," Daniel said, cutting him off. "I came here to see for myself what's happening on the ground, and what I've found is unacceptable. If this is happening in one store, I have to assume it's happening elsewhere. This isn't just about Lisa, it's about our company's culture." Holloway sat back, his expression a mixture of shock and discomfort. I don't know what to say. Lisa's always been a top performer. No one's ever brought these issues to my attention." "Because they're afraid," Daniel replied. "Afraid of retaliation, of losing their jobs. But I have statements from employees, records of incidents, and my own first-hand observations. This isn't something we can ignore." Before Holloway could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Daniel opened it to find Megan and Josh standing there, their expressions nervous but determined. He gestured for them to enter. "These are two of the employees who've been brave enough to come forward," Daniel said. "Megan has kept a journal of incidents involving Lisa, and Josh can speak to how her behavior has impacted the team." Holloway looked between them, his skepticism beginning to crack. "I'll hear them out." Megan stepped forward first, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I've worked here for over a year, and I used to love my job. But Lisa, she makes it impossible. She mocks customers, belittles us, and creates a hostile environment. I've written down everything I've seen, everything I've experienced." Josh followed, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "I've been here for 3 years. Lisa's always been like this, but no one's ever done anything about it. She controls everything, schedules, evaluations, and if you stand up to her, she makes your life miserable. We need things to change." Holloway listened intently, flipping through the folder as Megan and Josh spoke. The detailed accounts, combined with Daniel's observations, painted a clear picture of the systemic issues in the store. By the time they finished, Holloway looked visibly shaken. "This is troubling," he admitted, his voice low. "I had no idea things were this bad." Daniel leaned forward, his tone resolute. "You do now, and we need to act, not just in this store, but across the entire company. Lisa's behavior is a symptom of a larger problem. If we don't address it, we'll lose the trust of our employees and our customers." Holloway nodded slowly, a determined look settling on his face. "You're right. I'll start an investigation immediately. Lisa will be suspended while we review the evidence." "That's a start," Daniel said, his tone firm. "But I want more than an investigation. I want mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, an anonymous reporting system, and regular audits of workplace culture. This company was built on respect and inclusion, and it's time we lived up to those values." Holloway stood, extending a hand. "You have my word, Mr. Kane. We'll make this right." Daniel shook his hand, feeling a sense of relief and resolve. The first battle had been won, but the war for meaningful change was just beginning. As he left the office with Megan and Josh, he couldn't help but feel proud of their courage. Together they had taken the first step toward creating a better future, not just for this store, but for the entire company. As Daniel walked out of the manager's office with Megan and Josh, the weight of what they had just done lingered in the air. The store felt different now, less like a place of tension and more like a space on the cusp of transformation. Megan and Josh exchanged nervous glances, the gravity of their statements still settling in. "Do you think it'll work?" Megan asked quietly, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Daniel paused, looking at her with a reassuring smile. "It already has. Speaking up was the hardest part, and you both did that. Now it's up to leadership to follow through." Josh nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I just hope they actually do something. Lisa's been getting away with this for years." "They will," Daniel said firmly. "And if they don't, I'll make sure they do." As they rejoined the rest of the team, Daniel noticed that Lisa was conspicuously absent. Word of her suspension had spread quickly, and while the employees seemed cautious, there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. Conversations felt lighter, smiles more genuine. It was as if her absence had lifted an invisible weight from the room. Megan and Josh quietly resumed their tasks, blending into the flow of the workday. Daniel, however, remained on high alert, observing the subtle changes in the team's behavior. Employees who had previously seemed withdrawn were now more engaged, their movements less hurried, and their interactions more collaborative. It was a small but significant step toward rebuilding trust. Later that afternoon, Daniel made his way to the break room, where a few employees were gathered chatting over coffee. He approached the group cautiously, not wanting to disrupt their newfound sense of ease. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding up a coffee cup. The group exchanged glances before one of them, a young man named Carlos, nodded. "Sure, Mark, what's up?" Daniel sat down, studying their faces. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the lingering fear that speaking too freely might still carry consequences. He decided to address it head on. "I know things have been difficult here," he began, his tone calm but serious. "And I know a lot of you have probably felt like you couldn't say anything about it, but that's going to change." The employees exchanged wary looks, but Daniel pressed on. "Lisa's behavior wasn't just wrong. It was a symptom of a bigger problem, one that I take responsibility for. I should have seen it sooner, but I didn't. Now that I have, I'm going to do everything I can to fix it." Carlos frowned, his voice laced with skepticism. "How? It's not just Lisa. It's the whole system. We're all just numbers to management." Daniel leaned forward, meeting Carlos's gaze. "You're not just numbers to me. You're people. And I'm not just Mark. I'm Daniel Kane, the CEO of this company." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Carlos's eyes widened, and one of the other employees, a woman named Priya, gasped softly. Daniel let the revelation settle before continuing. "I came here undercover because I needed to see the truth for myself," he explained. What I found isn't what this company stands for. That's why Lisa's been suspended, and it's why changes are coming, not just here, but across all our stores." Priya spoke up, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "What kind of changes?" "For starters," Daniel said, "mandatory sensitivity training for all employees. An anonymous reporting system so you can speak up without fear. And regular culture audits to ensure this kind of behavior isn't ignored again. But more than that, I want to hear from you. What do you need to feel supported and respected here?" Carlos crossed his arms, his skepticism fading slightly. "You're really going to listen?" "I am," Daniel said simply. "And I'll prove it." Over the next hour, Daniel stayed in the break room, listening as employees opened up about their experiences. Some shared stories of frustration and disillusionment, while others offered practical suggestions for improvement. The conversation was raw and honest, and Daniel took it all in, his notebook filling with their ideas and concerns. By the time he left the break room, the atmosphere had shifted yet again. The employees weren't just cautiously optimistic, they were hopeful. Daniel felt a sense of accomplishment, but he knew the work was far from over. The real test would be in the weeks and months to come, as the promised changes were implemented. As the day wound down, Daniel found Megan and Josh near the checkout lanes. He pulled them aside, a quiet smile on his face. "You two did something brave today. Don't forget that." Megan smiled back, her confidence growing. "Thank you for standing up with us." Josh nodded, his usual nervousness replaced by a quiet resolve. "It feels good to finally do something." "It's just the beginning," Daniel said, "but it's a good one." As he walked out of the store that evening, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. Change had started, and this time, he would make sure it lasted. The next morning, Daniel returned to the store earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the parking lot. Today felt different, not because of what had already happened, but because of what was about to happen. He had arranged a meeting with the entire staff, a meeting where he would reveal his true identity to everyone and lay out the company's path forward. Inside, the employees gathered in the break room, their murmurs filling the air with a mix of curiosity and unease. Megan and Josh were seated together, their postures more relaxed than before, but their eyes scanned the room nervously. Carlos and Priya, who had spoken up during yesterday's conversation, were whispering quietly, stealing glances at Daniel. Other employees sat silently, their expressions guarded, waiting to see what this meeting was about. Lisa's absence was glaring. Her suspension had sent shockwaves through the team, and while some employees seemed relieved, others were clearly on edge, unsure of what would come next. Daniel understood their apprehension. Change, even when necessary, could be unsettling. When everyone had settled, Daniel stepped to the front of the room. He held a notebook in one hand and let the other rest at his side, exuding a calm confidence. He scanned the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible before he began to speak. "Good morning," he started, his voice steady. "Thank you all for being here. I know the last few days have been different, and I'm sure many of you have questions. That's why I called this meeting." The room was silent, the employees hanging on his words. Daniel took a deep breath and continued. "Some of you know me as Mark, the new trainee. But that's not the whole truth. My real name is Daniel Kane, and I'm the CEO of this company." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Whispers broke out among the employees, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Carlos leaned forward in his seat, his brow furrowed. Priya's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Megan and Josh exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. Daniel held up a hand, and the murmurs subsided. "I came here undercover because I needed to see what was happening in this store for myself. Over the past week, I've seen things that shocked me, disappointed me, and, frankly, broke my heart. This store, the people in it, deserve better." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I've seen employees like Megan and Josh go above and beyond, even in the face of disrespect and mistreatment. I've seen customers mocked and ignored when they should have been treated with care and dignity. And I've seen how fear and silence have allowed these problems to persist. Daniel placed the notebook on the table in front of him and leaned forward, his tone growing more resolute. But I didn't come here just to observe. I came here to make things right. That starts now. He turned to Holloway, who stood near the back of the room, observing quietly. Mr. Holloway has agreed to initiate immediate changes, starting with a full review of this store's management practices. Lisa is currently suspended, and her behavior is under investigation, but this isn't just about one person. It's about creating a culture where every employee feels safe, respected, and valued. Megan raised her hand timidly, and Daniel nodded for her to speak. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "Great question," Daniel said with a small smile. "First, we're implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all employees. This will help ensure that everyone understands how to treat both customers and colleagues with respect. Second, we're launching an anonymous reporting system, so anyone who experiences or witnesses mistreatment can speak up without fear of retaliation. Third, we'll be conducting regular culture audits to identify and address any issues before they escalate." Carlos raised his hand next, his skepticism evident. "And what about us? Are you actually going to listen to what we need, or is this just another corporate checklist?" Daniel met his gaze directly. "We're not just checking boxes. That's why I'm starting an employee advisory group, made up of people like you, frontline workers who know the real challenges you face. You'll have a direct line to me and other leaders, so we can make decisions based on what actually works for you." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Daniel's words hanging in the air. Then, Priya spoke up, her voice soft but hopeful. This feels real. Like you actually care." "I do," Daniel said simply, "and I'm here to prove it." The meeting ended with a cautious but palpable sense of optimism. As the employees returned to their tasks, the air in the store felt lighter. Daniel knew this was only the beginning, but he was determined to see it through. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it was happening, and that was what mattered. Over the next several weeks, the transformation began to take shape. Lisa's suspension was followed by a formal investigation, during which several employees came forward to share their experiences. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she ultimately resigned, rather than face termination. The news sent ripples through the team, many of whom felt both relief and vindication. In her absence, Megan was promoted to a temporary leadership role, tasked with helping implement the new changes. Her compassionate approach and natural ability to connect with others quickly earned her the respect of her colleagues. Josh, encouraged by the shift in culture, took on a mentorship role for new hires, ensuring they felt supported and valued from day one. The sensitivity training sessions, led by an external consultant, were eye-opening for many employees. Through role-playing exercises and open discussions, they began to recognize how their actions, or inaction, impacted those around them. The anonymous reporting system, now in place, gave employees a safe outlet to express their concerns, fostering a newfound sense of accountability. Daniel visited the store regularly, checking in with employees and participating in team meetings. He made it a point to listen more than he spoke, taking notes on their feedback and incorporating their ideas into the broader company strategy. His presence wasn't just symbolic, it was a reminder that leadership didn't exist in a vacuum. One afternoon, Mr. Carter, the disabled customer who had been mocked, returned to the store. This time, Megan greeted him personally, guiding him through the aisles and ensuring he had everything he needed. When he reached the checkout, Daniel stepped forward to shake his hand. "Mr. Carter," Daniel said warmly, "thank you for giving us another chance. I promise you, this is just the beginning." Mr. Carter smiled, his eyes softening. "It already feels different. Thank you for caring." As the weeks turned into months, the changes at the store became more visible. Employees walked with their heads held higher, their interactions with customers more genuine and enthusiastic. The culture of fear and silence had been replaced by one of respect and collaboration, and while there was still work to be done, the progress was undeniable. Daniel stood at the entrance of the store one evening, watching as the team closed up for the day. Megan and Josh were laughing as they reorganized a display, while Carlos and Priya chatted near the registers. The sight filled him with a quiet sense of pride. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Ethan. "You were right, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, Daniel turned to leave, the sound of laughter and camaraderie echoing behind him. Change had come to this store, and to the company, and Daniel knew it was only the beginning of something much bigger.